Hey there, welcome to today's episode. It's going to be a live, non-edited session where we just take a quick look at what's new for the Ableton Move. This is Move 1.2.0. It's the latest update. If you've got a Move and you've turned it on, chances are you'll see it's ready for a new update. You press the wheel and it will install that as long as you're hooked up to the Wi-Fi. We're just going to do a very quick overview of everything that's new. The first big ticket item seems to be MIDI sync. I'm not a MIDI guy, so I don't do sequencing to external gear and all that kind of stuff. It's just not something I mess around with. At best, I plug my MIDI controller in. I might link a couple of samplers together, but I'm more into the sample-based stuff. So it's not really that exciting for me, but I'm sure for you guys it will be. But MIDI sync is now available as an option. What we'll do is show you how to access that. You just go Shift. Second step in is where your settings are. Move down to MIDI. Previously, I believe there was MIDI in and MIDI out, which is still there. You've got your per track MIDI as well, so you could select which track you want to send MIDI from. This is for MIDI out. And if you go to the bottom, you will now see you've got sync send, which is going to open up a whole world of possibilities for you guys that aren't interested in sequencing your external gear. As I said, for me, not particularly so much of a big deal, but I'm sure a lot of you are going to love it. You can still select it here as well. So if you do sync, if you see where it says sync send, if you click that, you can turn it off using the encoder. And you'll notice as well, if you shift up to MIDI out, you'll notice underneath where you're changing it to MIDI in, you've also got the sync option that you can turn off and on using the encoder. Just wanted to show you that's there. So I'm sure a lot of you are going to be very happy about the new MIDI. What we can do underneath is take a look at other improvements. Let's move back out of this. Anything I can demonstrate, I will do. The playhead now pulses when loop mode is active. Very simple, but when we press the loop mode, you'll see it is pulsing. That is just so that you can differentiate between being in the standard step sequencing mode, because if you have a sample and you've loaded it onto your first step here, that will be lit up solid white. Previously, you would press the loop mode. This would also be solid white, so it was hard to know which mode you're in. Now, when you're in loop mode, it flashes, so you know where you're at. Very simple. Underneath is quite interesting because I believe this already existed. Added the following improvements to the 16 pitches layout. It is now possible to sequence notes in the 16 pitches layout by holding a step and pressing a pad. Pretty sure you always could. Also, you can now transpose notes in the 16 pitches layout note using the plus and minus buttons. Again, the reason I say that is because I made an entire video on this 16 pitches mode and how useful it was. And I showed you in that video that yes, you can play your 16 pitches here, but I showed you with the plus and minus buttons, you could move up and down. So I'm not sure why it's just being mentioned here, because you definitely could before. You can check out that other video. I'm not a liar, I promise. You could definitely do that. I also showed you in that video, and that's the reason I remembered, is because if you do Shift, your little musical note icon, you can actually switch what you want the 16 pitches to be. So do you want them in chromatic mode, or do you want to switch to in key, which you can also do alongside your drum rack with whatever sample is selected. So you can still keep it in key if you wish, and you can choose the key and the scale, and you can also still pitch up and down using the plus and minus buttons. Definitely showed you that in another video. I'm not sure why it's only just being mentioned now in the release notes. Pretty sure it was always there. Anyway, let's move on. Move now supports loading all samples from packs. Without testing this, my thought here is that if you're an Ableton Live user, which I'm assuming most people that own a Move will be, depending on what version of Live you own, whether it's the standard or the suite or whatever, you get access to a bunch of free packs, as they call them. Sample packs, extra instruments, stuff like that. Some of them you can pay for as well. I guess there were problems loading some of these onto the Move device. That now seems to have been fixed. That's my guess without having to get Ableton open and test it all. Let's move on. Restarting all clips is now achieved only by holding Shift and pressing the play button, and not when Shift is locked. I know this mode. I know why they've changed it, because I kept doing it by accident. So if we come back out of here, when you press play, I've got nothing loaded up, so you're not going to see anything, but you can see my step sequencer running through, so you know your track is playing. You can see it on your screen as well. But what would happen when you press the play button, it starts playing. When you press play, it stops. If you had Shift lock turned on when you double click Shift, what it would do previously is it would play, and if you hit the play button again, it would just loop. It would jump back to the beginning of the track, which I'm assuming now, yeah, it doesn't. So whether you've got Shift lock on or off, it now just plays and stops like it should. The only way you can get it to loop is by holding Shift, according to these notes. So let's test it. We got it playing. We'll hold Shift, press play. Yeah, And as much as I can't see it looping on the step sequencer, I can see it looping in the little window there where it's jumping back to the beginning. I'm not really sure what people use that mode for, to be honest. You can let me know in the comments whether it's a live performance thing or just a quick way of getting back to the beginning of your track. You just want to play around with it, whatever it is. But you can only do it now by holding Shift, not double clicking. What else have we got? When it is not possible to upload or download a cloud set successfully, you can now press the wheel when the cloud error message is displayed to retry the transfer. The cloud sync option for each set is accessible from the set overview after holding Shift and pressing a set pad. So again, I'm not an Ableton Cloud user. I probably should set it up because I believe it's free for up to 8 projects or something. So really no reason not to use it. My understanding, just reading through that there, is that I guess there was a problem with it sometimes. So you're trying to transfer a set, maybe it hangs up, something happens, it causes this error message. Maybe before, did you have to restart your device or something to try and get it to like snap out of it? It seems like now you can press the wheel and it's going to give it like a refresh and it's going to retry the transfer. That's my basic understanding of that. Again, if you've got some useful information, let everyone know in the comments. What's underneath? This one I'm particularly interested in. It's now easier to add samples to empty drum pads from Move's browser, which is especially useful when building a drum rack from scratch. This is an absolute must. I'm so glad that they fixed it here. But what I really want to see is that if you can do it here on the Move, can we please have this on the Push 2 and the Push 3? Because currently, I still think the Push 2 and the Push 3 work in a very similar way that it kind of previously worked on the Move. You load a sample into a drum rack, and then when you select the next pad to load another sample up, it goes right back to the beginning, and you have to use the filters, and you have to search, and you have to come through trying to find everything again in order to just load a few samples up. Let's test this out, though. If you press an empty pad when the browser is open, the browser now remains in its current position instead of going back to the root level, which means it's no longer necessary to navigate back to the sample folder every time you press an empty pad. That is a godsend. So let's test this out. We've got a sample here. This is completely empty. We don't have any samples loaded up. Let's load one in. It starts at a root level. I get that. It has to start somewhere if you've got no other samples loaded up. So that's fine. I'm going to go into user samples. I'm going to find black drums. This is one of my own drum kits. And I want to start with kicks, right? So I want to load a bunch of kicks up. I open up the kicks folder and there we go. We can hear these and load them up. What happened previously is when you select the next pad, it goes right back to the bottom of that menu and you have to come back through, find user samples, find drums, find kicks. Now, when you press the next pad, you'll notice it stays with the kick drum folder, which is exactly how it should, behave. So now what we can do, choose another kick drum while we're in here. Let's say kick 10 is the one that I want. That is now loaded up. Let's say I want a snare drum or something. I just have to go back a step. I don't have to go back to the root menu. I just have to go back a little bit to where I know I've got some snare drums. I can click on a snare drum. Let's say I want that one. Let's say on the next pad, I want another snare drum of a different kind. This one. They're now all loaded in. The one thing I was curious about, and I wanted to test this out, is that what happens when you commit then, right? So we've been in here while we're diving and looking for samples. It's all nice and simple. But when you commit and say, all right, I'm going to click this and load this in, what happens now? So we've got our drums all loaded up like we expected, so that's great. If I click on the kicks, I expect it to go back to the kick folder, which I'm hoping what we see. And yeah, it goes right back to the kick folder. So that's cool. Wherever you're at, it will go back to the last folder. Perfect. Please, push 2 and push 3. Can we see the same thing? But that's great, right? But what happens when we're out? Let's just come right back out for a second. What happens then when you select a new pad? So once you've kind of left your folders, what happens when we choose a new pad like this? Now, this part is quite interesting because when you click on a sample, it takes you right back to the root menu again. Now, part of me at first was thinking, well, shouldn't it still just remember where we were at so you can just come back to, say, the snares was the last folder? But actually, you can. The secret to that, though, is that you could see here, I could dive and come all the way back and look for what I'm looking for. But as long as you select any other pad, if you know the sample you're looking for is close, so let's say it was a snare, I can do that. It brings me right back to snares, and then I can jump straight back to the same pad and then load in another snare drum from this particular folder, or be only one folder away from finding my hi-hats or something else that you can load in. So pretty clever stuff. Very impressed with this, very happy. But yeah, please can we see the same kind of system for the push 2 and the push 3, because even with the filtering, I still feel that's a long-winded system on the push 2 and the push 3. So much so that I've made custom drum racks in order to kind of avoid it, because when you make a custom drum rack and you save it and you open it inside of the push, you can come back to the same folder. It kind of mimics this, but if we can do it here on the Move, please let us see that on the push 2 and the push 3. Anyway, I think we're going to round off now. Added some new presets, so some sound library improvements. For the drift, you have special effects. They've added a preset called Hoover. I'm not even testing it out. I don't see the point. You guys can do that. Effects, delay, they've added a new preset called time delay. And then underneath, improve velocity to volume settings for presets using wavetable and sampler to enhance their playability. I've never noticed any great problem with velocity to volume, but obviously some people have reported issues. Sounds like it's been fixed. Maybe it was too loud, too quiet. I've no idea. Underneath, some general bug fixes, stability improvements. So overall, I'm very happy with what they've done here. I think a lot of people are going to be very excited about the MIDI sync. I am certainly impressed with this new way of browsing for samples. The one thing I'm going to say in this video, and I'm going to keep pushing this point until hopefully somebody at Ableton listens to this, is that the one thing we still haven't seen in this update that I was really hoping to see, because it's such a basic quality of life item, is to kill all samples on the device. Sample heads will know what I'm talking about. If you just work with very short one-shots all the time, it might not be something that you're particularly concerned about, but if you use long samples a lot, you're experimenting, you're doing some sample chopping, I don't want to have to use the hold button or lay out the sequenced length of the sample in order to get a long sample to play for a short period of time. An MPC allows you to double-click the play button to stop all samples. The SP404 Mark II, I think, is like a shift and play. There are plenty of devices, groove boxes, that just let you kill all samples and sounds in one easy function. If we could see that brought to the Move, I would be a very happy bunny, because when they introduced this new item here about kind of not needing to double click the shift button in the play, I thought maybe they'd looked at that already, but unfortunately, that's not the way it's worked out. Doesn't really matter. I'm going to sign off there anyway, but please, Ableton, if you do watch any of my videos, if we could see that, it would be a fantastic addition. Take care. I'll see you guys in the next episode.